I was a practitioner for 26 years and then went to Boise State to teach in the educational leadership program. And when I met my co-author, he had had decades of looking at strategies that worked with at-risk kids, or at-risk was the term for a long time. And he had recently done a book where he had taken studies of high poverty, high performing schools and done a synthesis of those studies. And he was eager to go out and look himself at these. And then I particularly wanted to look at what kind of leadership. So what kind of leadership did it take administratively, and then leadership, teacher leadership. So that was really the impetus, is that we wanted to sort of see it for ourselves. It always started with a small group of committed people. In our case, it always included the principal. I think there are high poverty schools that are high performing, that serve kids well, that have alternative ways of governing, that don't have a principal. But in our study, they all had the principal and a small group of committed people that had something happen. It could be a very small thing. They could go to a conference together and start a conversation and decide that they were going to do something very differently, and that their kids were as smart as any other kids and deserved the kind of education that other kids were getting. I think of the little school on the Nez Perce Reservation in northern Idaho. That's an example of something that happened to them. They had gone and heard an inspirational speaker and made a commitment, actually on the airplane flying back to the nearest town to their community, to say, you know, we can do this. We really can. And so it started small. Many cases with some kind of safety. That could be really like physical safety, like getting rid of gang behavior, getting rid of gang paraphernalia, drugs, bullying, the very base stuff. The next kind of step, though, or almost concurrently, was always literacy, was taking on the issue of all kids becoming proficient in literacy, because it's the gateway skill. And they all have a similar journey in that they start small, they get at it, they keep it the main thing, and they keep it in the forefront. As they meet with some level of success, usually in a very short time, some quick wins, another whole group of people become believers and begin to challenge their mindsets about what these kids are capable of, push them to higher standards. So that's a similarity that you see. And then, so environment, and then a focus on learning. And as they get going, they get smarter about using data, about prioritizing their resources, about using their time. So that whole thing that we kind of call leadership capacity, that infrastructure stuff gets stronger. And they get more courageous about making the decisions for the needs of kids versus the needs of adults, which is too often the case. I think the other commonality in their journey is that things that have become unquestioned in so many schools, traditions that have become unquestioned, practiced mindsets. For instance, that a student can only take a test once, and that's the grade, and that's the end. That's sort of old school thinking. And these schools challenge that and use what we call uncommon sense. So it's uncommon practice that completely makes sense in what they're trying to do. And we bumped up against that a lot, whether you call it out-of-the-box thinking or challenging the status quo. That's a commonality in their journey. It's a co-authored book, and the framework really highlights the journey. And while they all have some unique characteristics, they have several things in common, which is what we created the framework out of, hoping that then folks would be able to apply it to their context. The three arenas are building leadership capacity, focusing on learning, and it's three kinds of learning. Obviously student learning, but also the adults in the building learning, and the system itself getting smarter about the way it does, so system level learning. And then the third arena is fostering a healthy, safe, and supportive learning environment. So the building leadership capacity is really the infrastructure pieces. It's how you hire and how you grow people to be successful in working with kids who live in poverty. It's how you use your resources, your material resources, your budget. It's how you allocate time. And it's shared leadership. It's a governing structure in these schools where the principal knows he or she can't do it alone. They empower people, a lot of teacher leadership, and a lot of reciprocal leadership. So the principal doesn't ask folks to do things that he or she can't support them in learning how to do or giving them the resources to do. So that's the leadership capacity. Focusing on learning is just that. It's often, one of the ways we find these schools, for good or for bad, is that we look at standardized test scores and we look at state mandated tests. But once you look at that and you really ask the question, how did they get there? You find that it is so much more than just doing well on standardized tests. And that was one of the things I really, as a practitioner, having never been a researcher, I was real biased about going into these schools, thinking they were going to be pretty sterile environments that pretty much taught to the test. And I did not find that at all. I found that all those other sorts of things that you would think of educating a whole child were part of what they were doing, and often partnerships to bring in mental health counselors or a dentist or a nurse. You would see them concentrating on parent involvement as much as they're trying to concentrate on learning math or reading and the standardized tests. So lots of measures of success, keeping kids in school, improving their attendance rates, those kinds of things. But the thing that's important about the learning piece is that what you see, while they didn't always articulate this, you see a very strong thread that runs between what kids have to learn and what they know their teachers have to learn, and then what the system has to do to support that. So there's a clear thread that runs through those three kinds of learning, and that's how they think. So if we have I'm thinking now of Dayton's Bluff and when we watch their PLCs. If we have something that we're seeing year after year kids consistently struggle with in let's say for reading, one I remember when we were there, watching them talking about inferential comprehension, and then having their school-based coach right there talking about what they might be able to do the next time they had time for PD. So what are the kids struggling with? What will the teachers then get sort of just-in-time learning? And I'm not sure that it always runs that smoothly at Dayton's Bluff, but that certainly was what we saw, that link. So we saw the student learning, the content needed for the teachers, and then the school responding to how we're going to get this to you. And then the third one, fostering healthy, safe, and supportive learning environment. So much goes into that. It starts with base stuff like safety and facilities and things like that, where you got to create an environment where it's okay to learn, both for kids and adults. And then engaging parents is a part of that. Truly understanding the influence of poverty is a part of that. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's many factors that work against largely a middle-class teaching force being successful with kids who live in poverty. Some of it is just misinformation, but the broader, bigger problem is that we have very entrenched stereotypes in the United States, and we are all products. If we've lived here for any amount of time, we're products of our culture here, and we bring those they shape our mental maps, which we talk about in the book. We bring those to school with us, and we rarely have an opportunity to challenge our mental maps. So that's a big part of creating that environment, is actually breaking through the entrenched stereotypes and seeing kids as capable, seeing parents as caring. Might not look the same as it does in a middle-class family, but studies show that people who live in poverty have the same hopes and dreams for their children as people who do not live in poverty. So there's a lot to that aspect, and we find that's where we start. When we talk to teachers, we start with the environment, because so much of it are things they can control, and not a lot of it costs money. Some of it does, but not a lot of it. It's more in our minds and the expectations we set for kids. I'm really lucky to be in a university that focuses on a specific kind of leader, a transformational leader that is going to mix up this, it's going to challenge the status quo. So that's really what we need in public education, not just in high poverty schools, but in all schools. We found the leader to be the formal leader, the principal, to be extremely important. Like I say, I think it could be done in another way, but the schools we studied, it would not have happened had the school principal not embraced the journey, not seen everything he or she did as either furthering it or not furthering it. And if it wasn't furthering the mission and the vision that he or she had for the school, they stopped doing it. So whether it was how they set up decision-making bodies, or how they did supervision and evaluation of teachers, or how they reached out to families, it was all on that same sort of singular notion that all kids in this school, regardless of socioeconomic class, are going to meet high standards. Society's never going to be better for our own kids until it's better for every kid. And that's the business we're in. We're in the business of school response to family background. And we know it can be done.